And now we're live. Welcome to Startup TNT's education series for entrepreneurs. This is the final edition of our summer series, and I'm really happy to have Reg Joseph from Health Cities as our guest today. We'll be talking about validating your product in the health space. Reg, how are you doing?
I'm doing great, Zach. Thanks for having me today.
Reg, where are you calling from?
In my office in Edmonton.
Downtown Edmonton. I'm actually calling from Montreal. I'm in Montreal for the week. It's great to be back here, and I'm heading out to Startup Fest starting tomorrow.
Nice.
But Reg, let's dive into it. And I just maybe, as we dive into it, I want everyone to know you should be able to post questions in the chat. And so feel free to post questions. You know, we like to make this interactive. You want to learn a little bit more about any topics that are coming up here, post them in the chat. We'll get to them. And we're going to go a little bit into a little background on Reg and what's going on at Health Cities. And then we're going to talk a little bit practically about what the health system looks like in Canada and how to sort of validate your technology within the framework of the Canadian healthcare system. So, Reg, let's start it off with going back to your history, because I know it's actually quite rich in the Edmonton startup community. You know, what was your experience? Let's actually go way back. Let's go back to Yadda Yadda, Reg. What were you doing at Yadda Yadda? And you got your start in the tech ecosystem there.
I'm surprised that you actually know about that. I was doing business development. We had developed a what they called at the time a massive parallel storage system, and I was looking for different verticals to get that solution into. So I was doing business development for them.
And how long were you there for?
I'd say it was about a couple of years, and then after that, I left to the U.S. and I spent a number of years there. Spent a few years working for a large multinational life sciences company, new product development, new launches, which definitely helped for my startup experience later. And then spent a couple of years on Wall Street as an analyst for an investment bank in the life sciences space.
Okay, so you kind of became an expert in life sciences investment. And then more recently, you helped launch some Edmonton startup companies like you were previously.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So coming back from the US, I've always sort of played around between health and tech. And so my first company when I got back was a company called Data Gardens that was actually doing the very beginnings of what we call today virtualization. And then I founded a company with the former Dean of Medicine, Dr. Richard Fedoruk, who's since passed, to create an early stage colon cancer diagnostics company, which we took to the market in the US. And that comes to some points we're going to get into later, Zach, of the fact that I couldn't launch that product here in Canada. Had to take it to the US is one of my biggest pet peeves, and a lot of what Health Cities is about, actually.
Okay, well, maybe we're going to dive into that a little bit later, because after you did that, you then worked at AHS, and was the role at AHS related to that thorny problem that you just identified?
Yeah, actually, no, I didn't. I actually worked for what was called at the time. These acronyms are always challenging, Zach. It was at the time it was called AIHS, and what that is Alberta Innovates.
Excuse me, I was missing a very important letter in the acronym.
It wouldn't be the first time, and it won't be the last time. So it later became Alberta Innovates. And so what I was doing there was and many of our listeners who are from Alberta will know that we have the Alberta Heritage Fund, and AIHS, or the Health Division of Alberta Innovates, gets its annual budget from the interest draw of the Heritage Fund. So my job was really deploying those funds towards research and innovation in the health space in Alberta.
Okay, and then as we move farther along in your career here, let's now take it to Health Cities, Reg. You launched Health Cities a few years ago. What was the motivation for launching Health Cities?
Well, the true motivation for launching that was with the funds that I had at Alberta Innovates, I was not able to spur the kind of innovation that we needed in the health sector. And so talking with a few friends and at the same time there was an opportunity emerging through Don Ivison's initiative around health cities. And so took the opportunity to dive into health cities and form that really as a frustration of what I wasn't able to do at Alberta Innovates.
Well, it looks like we're having a little bit of technical difficulties with Zach's internet over there in Montreal.
Yeah, we'll give him a sec to get back on.
I'm sorry, guys. My internet connection was a little spotty there. Can you hear me okay now?
We can. You're all good.
Okay. Sorry, Reg. Let's get back to the history of launching health cities and the motivations for it.
Yeah, right. So really just sort of repeating myself a little bit here. The frustrations I had at Alberta Innovates in terms of driving health innovation and health tech in the province, frustrations around that is what actually drove me to form Health Cities. Now, as you already probably know, Zach, simultaneously there was an initiative being driven by Don Ivison at the city at the time around health and health tech. And so those two opportunities sort of merged together and became Health Cities.
Well, it looks like we lost him again.
I've never seen you this quiet, Reg.
It is our first time for everything.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, I don't know, Dom. Maybe we'll give him a little bit, and then I don't know if I should maybe just keep chatting a little bit. And
Yeah, I mean, why not? Like, he kind of briefed you a little bit on what kind of today's topic was, and I guess maybe you can take it solo for now.
Yeah, no, and happy to do so. It's not a problem at all. So Zach was just asking me about Health Cities and how it formed. I'd like to tell you a little bit about Health Cities so that folks are clear. One of the things that is a little bit of a misnomer, and I want to make sure that folks online appreciate, is that we're actually not a service organization in the sense that we don't provide specific programming to help entrepreneurs or startups. There's a lot of organizations that do that. Startup TNT does that as well through your investor forums. But you've got Startup Edmonton, Innovate Edmonton, and there's a bunch of other organizations that do that. We're really trying to address one of the key problems, which is being able to test, try, and scale in live clinical settings in Alberta. So what we're doing is we're partnering up with a variety of healthcare specific verticals to create pathways so that we can get innovations in so that companies can actually scale by testing and validating in those environments, and then use the data that they generate from those environments to take their companies global. And maybe we'll pause and just see if Zach comes on or not. Oh.
Hey, Reg, while we're waiting out a question, so what about sort of health products that are non-clinical? I know you must know him, Daryl Shorty, the guy with the orthopedic one. So obviously not a pharmaceutical or clinical type product. So what's the kind of support for those kinds of products?
Yeah, no, really good question, Glenn. And honestly, we work with all of those. So there's a bit of a convergence, Glenn, and you know this better than I do, between sort of the consumer tech plays and health. And so those kinds of technologies that can actually drive better health outcomes are totally game, if you will. And a good example of that is we just did a partnership with a company out of Toronto called Voice, VOYCE. And it's an interesting company, but not a health company by any means. It's a tech company. They're Uber for translations. So you can go on real time on your iPad or phone and say, hey, I need somebody who can speak German. And within a minute, you'll have a German translator on, and you've got live translation. So one of the problems on the health side, particularly when we're looking at diagnostic imaging and sort of things around healthcare where patients need to go and get either images or diagnostic work done, language barriers are huge. And so trying to find a translator and doing all that kind of stuff, what happens is a lot of patients drop off. So we helped garner a partnership between Voice and MIC, which is the largest imaging group here in Alberta. And now they're doing real-time translations for patients that are calling in where English may not be their first language. And they're just trying to figure out, okay, well, what is this imaging for? Why am I coming in? How do I book an appointment? All of those kinds of things can now be done with real live translation. So Glenn, to your point, we're really looking at those consumer type technologies as well that can drive better outcomes in health. And that picks up on another pet peeve. I'm going to be talking about pet peeves a lot today, but another pet peeve that I have around the health sector is a lot of folks that are practicing in the health sector feel that the health sector is really, really unique and that lessons from other sectors don't apply. And I vehemently disagree. A hospital system, for example, is just like any massive system, and it needs to be run with operations folks in mind, with engineers in mind, to drive efficiency within the system, right? So I don't think the health system is that unique. Just like any other sector, it's got its certain drivers and so forth, but the health system, it honestly doesn't is not that different than the other sector. Zach, you had a question around what was it again?
So I just posted a question in the chat there. Hopefully my internet connection's okay here, but appreciate everyone kind of jumping in to facilitate without me. Look at that. Listen, Reg, I know I was being a little bit cheeky there. I was asking, is your digital health integration readiness program inspired also by a pet peeve of yours?
Yeah, well, Zach, absolutely it is. So let me give you the sort of the sales pitch on that digital readiness program. When you think of the startup community, it's just insane. So if you wanted to get integrated digitally into our health system, you have to integrate with what's called an electronic medical record. And to do that now, say in primary care, if you wanted to integrate with TELUS's EMR, it takes 5 years and up to $5 million to do this. So if you think of any startups that are coming through our investment forum, Zach, the dollars that they have has to be all put towards product and product features. No investor is going to fork up those kinds of dollars just for back-end integration. It's just insane. So one company, a Calgary company called Bright Squid, did this. They spent the 5 years and $5 million to do this, get integrated, get their solution on. But they realized that a lot of facets of what needed to be done can be genericized. So effectively, they've built a bit of a middle layer where now other companies can integrate onto an EMR much faster. So now we're talking a matter of 6 to 9 months and for a cost of maybe $100,000. So huge factor difference in terms of getting companies on. And this is really important, Zach, because, and I've seen this so many times, digital health companies will maybe go out to a local doc they might know, somebody out of the community, and they might go to her and say, hey, look, I've got a really interesting technology. Do you want to try it out? And there's a lot of innovative physicians out there, and they're happy to try it out. The problem is that because it's not integrated into their electronic medical record system, they can't really test out that technology because they want to see, okay, well, can this technology predict hypertension in these patients that I think would be hypertensive? They can't do that because it's not integrated in. And so what you do is you end up working with a lot of dummy data to sort of prove the value proposition. And then the clinician has to take a wild bet on whether this thing is going to work or not. But now with this quick digital integration, you can actually get it right into the system. The doc can go online and click on the particular app, test and try it any way they want. And they can then make an informed decision before buying.
Okay, and that's part of your digital health integration system that you're building right now, or that is built?
Yeah, it's built.
Yeah, okay. And so how do companies get plugged into that system in particular?
Yeah, it's really good. We are just launching come fall the formal digital integration system. So we had what was called pre-hatch, where we had about 22 companies get prepped up to do the integration. So there's a lot of internal work that they need to do in terms of ensuring that their software is up to code and all that kind of stuff. So we did 3 sessions, 22 companies have gone through. Now we're at the stage that some of those companies can migrate directly into integrating into the health system. And so we're going to launch that in the fall. And honestly, if folks are interested, I would say reach out to me directly. We'll put you in queue for when that gets set up.
Yeah, I was going to ask, do you think it's always been necessary for companies to do a bit of like a testing phase beforehand to get all of their software in line with the program before they can just jump right into it? That's always
100%, Zach, and that's why we have this pre-hatch program, because a lot of folks don't understand just sort of the requirements that one would need to integrate into a system such as that. And the earlier you know that, the better it is, because then you're not re-engineering. I mean, it's frustrating for me to see when you've got a great company that's got a really cool solution that's coming up, and feature-wise, it's rich and it's got all what you're looking for, but they can't integrate. And because of decisions that they made earlier on, they might have to start from scratch, which is really frustrating when you're burning up angel capital to do so.
Yeah, absolutely. And Reg, what are the types of companies that are participating in this program? Because I looked at the list of the cohort participants and I saw a pretty big range from medical device companies to more digital health, purely digital tech companies.
Yeah,
but,
actually, at its base level,
what do these companies look like that are a good fit?
It can be any company where data is critical, right? So there's a number of medical device companies where the device themselves is capturing data, recording data, doing data analytics. Or there are companies that are actually database companies who are doing analytics on data and so forth. Any one of those companies, if they're touching health system data, then they're a good candidate for this program. And that brings me to another thing where I'm starting to get really interested in is there's a few companies that are on that list that are not health companies. And they come from the tech sector or other sectors, and they're now looking to see how their technology can apply in the health world. And I think that's great. And we start seeing more and more convergence of these companies from different sectors into health, the more our sector itself is going to grow.
I'll fill in for Zach.
How are you?
Good, how are you?
Very good. So Zach's having a little bit of internet problems, so he's been dropping in and off, and we've been doing not too bad. Oh, Zach's back. Zach's back up.
Zach's back.
All right, I got shaky internet here.
Zach's maybe going to tether his phone. That'd be good.
Well, I was having trouble getting my phone to tether, but now it's tethered, so I think it'll be okay.
All right, get it going.
Yeah, sorry about that, Reg. Reg, do you want to talk about the remote monitoring system you're working on too?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's 2 sort of remote monitoring systems that we're doing. One is a home health monitoring system. We partnered up with what are called primary care clinics. And basically what we're doing is we're enabling patients to have these devices at home, monitor themselves, wirelessly transmit that data into a triage center, and get the care that they need remotely. For most of the individuals, Zach, these are not emergency type situations. These are people that might have a chronic disease. They might have diabetes or they might have arthritis, and they're pretty stable, but they need to have regular check-ins. And this is a great way to do it because in some cases, particularly in rural Alberta, some of these folks are taking an hour and a half or two to drive into the clinic. And as you probably can appreciate, some of these appointments are literally 5 minutes. They're checking blood pressure, weight, heart rate, and a few other biometrics, and that's about it. It's a good setup. You only need 5 minutes, but you definitely don't need to drive in for 2 hours. So what we've done there, this comes back to sort of who Health Cities is, Zach. So as opposed to helping companies per se and providing services to companies or training to companies, we're creating these environments. So with the home health monitoring, what we've done is we've created a mechanism that all the way along that home health monitoring value chain, we've now created a mechanism where you can actually interject technology so that the clinicians can say, hey, at the beginning of it, where we're looking at capturing the data, we can put in devices. During the middle of it, when we're looking at how to transmit and analyze the data, we can put in technology. On the back end of it, when we're trying to decide how we're going to enact care for the patients, we can again put technology in. So that's the real change. And so we're now working with the Ministry of Health and Prairies Can to set up PCN innovation sites where this will be standard practice for companies to come in, test, try, validate, and scale in that environment.
Okay, awesome, Reg. And so is that another one? Did that have an open intake as well? Or how do people participate in that?
Sorry, Zach, say that again.
How, can startups try out new remote monitoring systems in that environment as well? Or is that, how do people get involved with it?
So that, so we're getting that set up right now. So we've identified which PCNs are likely to be those innovation sites. And now basically the challenge that we have, Zach, is funding. So those PCN sites don't have a lot of resources or a lot of capacity to spend time with companies. So what we're trying to do is pull together funding both from the province and the feds to put into those PCNs so that they have the capacity to then work with these companies. So we're hoping to get that launched in September, October.
All right, very cool. All right, Reg, we've heard a lot about so far kind of like initiatives that you're working on as Health Cities to try and help people more efficiently validate their technology. But I think it might be good for all of us to take a step back and just understand, how is the healthcare system structured, in particular, the buying decision for implementing new technologies? I know that you're well versed in this and you've spoken to it before. So, I think it's all good on us to understand what the buying decision looks like from the perspective of the healthcare system as we're trying to validate our own technology.
Well, yeah, and you're ticking off every one of my pet peeves. So in the health system, guys, anybody who's touched the health system will know that we are laggard adopters. We are far behind. And actually, one of the things I'll get on my soapbox about, Zach, very quickly here is, in the past, it was more around, it's frustrating. People are using fax machines and all these antiquated systems, blah, 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 frustrating as heck, takes way more time than I need to. But we would all chalk it up to say, well, that's just frustrations. In the end, our health system is really good. It's just frustrating to deal with. Even that now is no longer held true. So there's been a study that's been done, and I'm happy to share it with this group here, that compares the G11 countries and their health system performances, as well as their healthcare outcomes. So out of 11 countries, the G11, Canada has now fallen to number 10. And most people that I talk to, most Canadians that I talk to, are shocked by that, because we still have this feeling that, health system frustrating, health system annoying, but we still have really, really good healthcare. Well, not when you're comparing to Australia, France, Germany, UK, Norway, any of these G11 countries, not so much. The only country in the G11 that's below us is the US. And so it's coming to a point, Zach, where not only is it just frustrating and annoying, it's actually affecting our healthcare. It's actually affecting how well Canadians and Albertans are faring in terms of when they touch the healthcare system. So that's a big challenge. So this innovation gap that we have is really something that we've got to get around. And so you mentioned it, Zach. You know, we have this wonderful opportunity here where we have a health authority, Alberta Health Services, serves 4.5 million people, and it's a very antiquated system. And you know, from a purchasing perspective, they are a big buyer. Again, a lot of folks may not appreciate this, but Alberta Health Services is the largest health authority in Canada. So they are a big buyer. And they tend to buy from large multinationals and established companies. They actually even, honestly, they have a policy that says you need to generate data from a different jurisdiction other than Alberta if you want to sell to Alberta. Well, that's a brick wall for any startup in Alberta getting into the health system. So, I mean, that's why we've been working with these different verticals, Zach. Again, just to talk about the system writ large so folks understand, Alberta Health Services is big, and it is a big component of our health system. Absolutely, 80% of our spend goes there, but it's not the entire health system. Really what Alberta Health Services does is acute care. That's what their main focus is. They do a few other things. So they run hospitals is what they do. But primary care, for example, which is in community, those primary care clinics that I was talking about or networks, they're all managed directly from the Ministry of Health. They're not governed by Alberta Health Services. So there's other verticals in there that are not directly managed by Alberta Health Services. So there's a lot of opportunities to create these environments for companies to scale and so forth. And what's neat about that, I don't know, I'm just running on here, Zach, but what's neat about that is that when we look at where the growth sectors are, it's not in hospitals. The growth sectors are outside of hospitals in communities. That's where all the sexy technology is coming out. That's where we're seeing all these new well-funded digital health companies. Those are the people and the services that they're offering. It's outside of acute care. So it fits really, really well that those are the channels that we're working with to get our companies scaled up, because those are the key markets that are the big growth markets and going to really do well for whether it's large multinational partnerships or acquisitions or what have you. They're in the right spot when they're working with that. Last thing I'll make is that it's not that we don't work with the acute care system, we do, but we just want to make sure that we're looking at all avenues in terms of where where health touches the individual.
Well, you know, you hit on quite a few interesting points here, Reg. I'd like to dive into a couple of them further. One is what I kind of was getting from a part of what you just told us is that as a startup, it might actually be easier to validate your technology in the primary care networks outside of the hospital system.
Yeah,
and getting involved there, and that's also where the growth is. So, why would you say the growth is there?
Okay, well, the reason why the growth is there is that health systems are going through a disruption, very much like the same disruption we've seen in media, with streaming, with transportation, with Uber and Lyft and all the rest of it. That same level of disruption is happening in healthcare. And what those transformations that have happened in the other sectors, effectively what they've done, Zach, and I don't know if you'll agree with me or not, but effectively what they've done is they've democratized access, right? So now when we're looking for content, we can subscribe to any number of streaming devices, streaming services, and get content that a decade ago you and I would never dream about getting, right? And it's democratizing that access. If I want to pay, a service fee of X few bucks a month, I can now get access to content that I could have never dreamed of before. Same thing on transportation, same thing in other sectors as well. That's exactly what's happening in health. So we're democratizing access to healthcare. We're pushing healthcare technology, healthcare services, healthcare engagement out into the community, just like those other sectors are. And we're driving better access and driving better health outcomes as a result of that. And so that's a global shift that's occurring. And that's where I get excited, because I think that our digital health companies can really ride that wave of transformation in health.
Okay. Awesome, Reg. Do we want to go back for a minute to your experience in metabolomics and something you touched on at the beginning, which was you couldn't actually bring that product to market in Alberta first. You had to bring it to market, I believe it was in the United States, you said.
In the US, yeah.
So what was maybe, like, I think you might have hinted at some of the structural problems there. If in Alberta, we're not actually going to test a product at all until it's been validated outside of Alberta.
Right.
Was that the primary problem that you
Yeah,
faced?
I mean, we just don't have the systems in play here to test, try, and validate something de novo, right? So if it was developed here, to establish the clinical trials here, to do that evaluation, to do that entire value chain right here in Alberta, we have the pockets of that expertise, but it's not linked up in a way where you can actually execute on it. So yeah, with MTI, the company that I founded, we were working with Alberta Health Services on trials, generating data. Honestly, I think, and I wouldn't be surprised that I think there's still a file at Alberta Health Services that's somebody's working on evaluating whether this colon cancer test is going to work here in Alberta or not. Meanwhile, we're already in the market in the US, right? And it's frustrating. What was more frustrating than anything else, I came from it a business angle. My co-founder, Dr. Fedoruk, he just wanted his own patients to have access. Right, that was his most, that's what drove him to do this. He knew that if we could screen early, we could identify those pre-cancerous, I'm getting technical now, but those pre-cancerous polyps before they're cancerous, they can be removed and you have no problem. And that's why this was such a breakthrough technology. And so he just wanted it for his own patients here, because he was seeing far too many individuals coming in too late, when they've already have colon cancer and that colon cancer is starting to spread. And he would always say that there's no need for this. If we could have an early stage screen, we could catch these things way, way earlier. Because the interesting thing on that specific technology and testing for these polyps, those polyps stay in your colon system for 8 to 10 years before they become cancerous. So you've got a long window to detect these polyps and remove them before they ever become cancerous, right? So he was really excited about getting this to his own patients. And unfortunately, he passed away a few years ago. And so he never got to see his own patients get the benefit of this technology. Another pet peeve, Zach, I'm just going to mention it really quickly. What we need to understand, though, that technology being developed in here in Alberta, provincial dollars went into developing that technology. Federal dollars went to go developing that technology. That's our tax dollars. You and I paid taxes for that technology to be developed. And if you and I wanted to get that test today, we'd have to go to New Jersey.
Yeah.
That's what frustrates me.
That is frustrating. Do you see any changes at Alberta Health Services or in the healthcare system, since that time, that's move them closer to being able to adapt these types of technologies more readily?
Yeah, there are some. I mean, there's definitely an active group at Alberta Health Services on the innovation side that are definitely trying, and these folks are giving it their best, but they just don't have all the systems set up yet to do it. We are seeing some changes on different fronts with respect to data, for example. This government has really put a lot of muscle behind provincial data and data systems. And so how do we start using data systems from justice, from social services, from other ministries around so that we can drive economic growth? And people are starting to look at that with health and health data as well, to see how we can get smarter about using the data that we have and to make data-driven decisions so that we can actually spend those dollars in the most effective way. So there are some changes coming, and that government of Alberta data strategy is one key one that I think is going to impact all the ministries, including health.
That's good to hear. And is there any opportunity for the type of diagnostics that you're describing with metabolomics to work their way through the system in the primary care networks, or do those all have to be at the hospital? Is that another
Absolutely.
opportunity?
Right. Yeah. So that's the thing that we're trying to work with right now. And actually, we're having conversations with a couple of diagnostic companies to see, okay, how do we put this into community-based clinics? Because a lot of these tests, Zach, are very non-invasive. You know, they're the equivalent of like a pregnancy test that you could buy from Shoppers Drug Mart, right? So you don't need to be in a clinical lab environment to run this test or many of these tests. And so that's exactly what we're doing now. We're working with these primary care clinics to say, hey, can we start doing more in your clinic? Now, of course, they're coming back to us and saying a couple of things. First, they're saying, well, gee whiz, we don't have people. Like the people that we have are already burnt out due to COVID. We're short on nurses. You know the stories out. But then secondly, they're also coming back and saying, well, we haven't done those things in the past before, right? Because we haven't run those diagnostic things before. And so that's where partnerships with, say, DynaLife comes in really, really handy, because DynaLife can build in and help build in robustness into those younger companies that are developing these diagnostic tests. And so that when we bring it to a primary care clinic, it's other than running the test, there's not a lot of technical stuff that they need to know how to do, right? And so those kinds of partnerships is what we're really focusing on, Zach, is we're building that value chain. So who do I need to bring in here to help the companies get their test to a level where a clinician can use it? Where can I find those clinicians that can actually activate it? How do I plug that back into the system so that once a diagnosis is made, that we can actually do something about it? We're building that piecemeal as we're going, right? And it's starting to work. We're starting to see these paths that are working. So you're right. I think we can use our primary care clinics far more than we do today. And some of them anyway, I think are ready to move in that direction.
Well, you know what? Maybe this is a good time to bring up a local success story that I know you've helped out in their journey, and that's Meadow AI.
Yeah. Here's a great thing. And here's one of the things that also gives you a little bit more about how health cities operate. So one of the things we don't do, Zach, is I don't walk into a primary care clinic, for example, with a briefcase of cool medical technologies and say, hey, do you guys want to try this mental health app, or you want to try this cool device? We don't do that, because the adoption for those, Zach, is going to be zero, because we've mentioned this time and time again. They're over capacity, they're overworked, and they've got huge problems that they're trying to solve today. And if your briefcase doesn't have a solution to one of their problems, then they're like, you know what? It's cool, but I don't have time. Like, I got things bursting at the seams here. I don't have time to work with your cool little device, right? So what we do is we actually go and actually find out from our clinicians what are the problems that they're trying to solve, and then where we can make those connections and bring in our innovators, local companies. That's when we get this sort of match made in heaven scenario. And so that's also why, Zach, I say that we don't provide services to companies, because if a company comes to me and says, hey, I've got this cool little device, can you sell it for me? I'm like, well, I can definitely talk to folks to see if that addresses a key need that they're trying to solve today. But if it's not, then it's not going to be on the priority list, right? So the Meadow AI story is exactly that. We went out to Westview PCN. Westview PCN actually provides healthcare to First Nations communities. And we have this interesting problem or challenge in our First Nations communities. And we don't really quite understand why. Some of it, we think it's genetic. Some of it, we think it's behavioral. Regardless of that, we have a very high incidence rate of something called hip dysplasia, which really just means like a misalignment of the hip. And it's really hard to detect if you're checking it by hand, if you will. So when a baby's born, docs will sometimes just check your hips to see if they're moving properly and so forth. It's really hard to detect. And in most cases, it's pretty benign because it's so slight that it doesn't really affect you. Kids who have it can jump, play, skip, do everything, and you would never know. Where it becomes a problem is in middle ages, and more in men than in women, you get osteoarthritis of the hip. And today, less than 1% of those cases warrant some kind of surgery or medical intervention. For the rest of the cases, 99% of them, all we provide is pain management. And Zach, pain management is code for opioids, right? And so the nurse practitioners that we've been talking to said, Reg, we're actually part of the addictions problem because we're prescribing these opioids to all these folks, right? And the incidence rate, I didn't mention this, the incident rate in our First Nations communities of hip dysplasia is 40 times, not percent, 40 times higher than the average population. So it's a pretty significant challenge in First Nations communities. So the nurses are saying, hey, we're prescribing opioids, and sure enough, 3 to 6 months later, we're at their house with an naloxone kit because they've OD'd. So there's got to be a better way. And this is exactly where Meadow AI comes in. So one of the problems we have, another problem, is getting our First Nations families into diagnostic centers. Just getting the coordination, getting transportation set up, getting the right imaging folks set up at the right time. It's a nightmare. And I did not appreciate how much of a nightmare it is, but it is. And so we came up with sort of a team, and we said, well, why don't we flip it on its head? Why do we have to bring people out of community into a diagnostic center? Why couldn't we take the diagnostic into the community? And therein lies the real value proposition of local company Meadow AI, because they have a back-end artificial intelligence algorithm development that helps correct for imaging. So we could have guys like you and I, Zach, trained up in about an hour to take high fidelity images using a handheld ultrasound. And with Meadow AI's back end, you get really, really good images, good enough for a radiologist to make a diagnosis from. So now all of a sudden we've broken down these barriers. We don't have to be in a building. We can arm folks in our First Nations communities with this handheld ultrasound, put Meadow AI on the back end of it. And in many cases, we have an LPN that actually does the screening. But in some cases, it's not even an LPN. It could be a community member, because more and more, and you know this, Zach, regardless of community that you're from, more and more people are doing home births, more and more people are moving away from hospital-based births. Well, that's the same thing in our First Nations communities too. And so now you could have a home birth in community and have an untrained individual take these images, send them in, and decide whether there's any action requirement. Now, here's the fun part about it. The treatment part, if you can diagnose it early, is really old tech, but it works. It's basically a sling/cast that you put on, but you have to do it 6 to 8 weeks post-birth because the bones are still malleable. Okay. So once you put this on, the literature shows that you have a 95% cure rate. Like they no longer have hip dysplasia anymore. So we can actually get rid of the problem overall, and all those downstream complications of people coming in with osteoarthritis when they're 40 or 50, those kinds of things, we can wipe that off by doing this early stage screening. On the part of how that helps the economic side of things, that data generated in those communities for Meadow AI's technology was part of, because they've done also a bunch of other clinical trials and stuff, but was part of the success in them getting FDA approval in the States. And I think they've, if they haven't secured it yet, they're very, very close to securing CE mark in Europe. So they're on their way. So I love that story, Zach, because first we've been able to actually solve a health issue in our communities and provide community capacity to deliver healthcare. And then secondly, a local company wins from that and is able to scale globally.
Yeah, you started off with saying that it's really hard to validate and test out your technology locally due to structural issues, but you seem to find a way to do it in this case. What do you think? So what do you think was the secret to Meadow AI being able to validate their tech here and then expanding versus your experience with metabolomics, where, it was in kind of the
Well, so here's the thing is that, it was a lot of, even from the Meadow AI project, it was a lot of work connecting a lot of dots, right? Because having those nurses in community doing the screening, once they figured out that they could do it and it was relatively easy, they didn't have any problems. They're like, oh, we can do this. That's not a problem. But then I had to make sure that the back end was also taken care of, which means that those images need to be sent wirelessly to a radiologist. That radiologist works at Alberta Health Services. That radiologist has to be able to view those images, make a diagnosis, and then go from there. And so, the real win there was we had some radiologists that were also really big champions of what we were trying to do. And so they helped figure out on the back end what they would need to do on their end to make sure that this whole circle worked and worked effectively. So really, Zach, it comes down to, in every one of these cases that I've talked about, it is a huge number of partnerships that we're putting together where like-minded people are coming together and say, we should be able to make this work. So, this group is working on that piece of it. The other group's working on the other piece of it. And then we hook it together, and lo and behold, every once in a while, we can actually make it work. But what I want to do is, I don't want to do that in an ad hoc way every time we do one of these projects. So I'm trying to operationalize this and say, yeah, we've actually got a system here. If you've got this kind of technology that's going to be validated in this kind of environment, here, this is where you go, because we've got a pathway set up for that. And if I can set up these 6 or 8 pathways for different kinds of things, like for long-term care, for primary care, First Nations care, whatever, home care, whatever it may be, then I can actually start working with companies and saying, oh, you've got that kind of a technology, you should go there. Because I've already got a system. I know it's all plugged in and they'll take care of you, kind of thing, right? And that's what the real mandate here is for me and for Health Cities, is to develop these pathways in all these sort of different healthcare verticals.
Well, I really like what you said there. Operationalize basically the experience the Meadow AI had, so that more of our local companies can have a similar experience.
Exactly.
And use the local community to validate their tech and then expand.
Well, and what happened well for us, and again, I have to give a lot of my gratitude to our clinicians out at the Westview PCN. They established sort of a pathway that actually allows one to figure out how to implement a new technology. So now we're actually working with other companies. Kent Imaging out of Calgary, for one, is another one that we're working with and saying, okay, well, can we use the Meadow AI example and just change the technology and put in Kent Imaging's technology now? And because the way it's being used and who would do the work and how the images get back and so forth is actually pretty similar. So we've already created that pathway. Can I just now interject different kinds of technologies? And so that's sort of the next step of scaling this, is creating it robust enough that I can do this over multiple PCNs, but with a bunch of different technologies.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that sounds like an important and ambitious goal for us here in Alberta. I'm looking at the time here, Reg, and I'm seeing there's only 10 minutes left. I think that we should touch on the regulatory aspect of validating technology briefly. And then I'll just remind people, if you guys have any specific questions you want to ask before we run out of time here, feel free to throw them in the chat. But let's talk regulatory component briefly. We all know this is a critical component for the health tech. Sorry.
It is. Yeah.
Go ahead.
And but there's different levels, right? So, the most onerous regulatory requirements are for pharmaceuticals. And that's the area that our friends over at API and Andrew McIsaac work with. And they know that space inside and out. But that's where you hear of these multi-year, huge, long clinical trials that costs millions and millions of dollars. When in the news today, we don't have an approved vaccine for COVID for children under 5 in Canada. That's because all the trials and the work is still being evaluated by Health Canada. So that's on the far end of the most it takes. And then on the flip side, now the health tech is really started to broaden, and we're starting to see entrance and convergence from different technologies and ideas. And I think, Zach, you might have popped off when I was talking about voice and MIC. Well, that's a pure consumer tech play that's helping in a health environment. On that, there's no regulatory required. There's no Health Canada approval required. There's some data requirements and so forth. There's some other regulations that one needs to meet to make that work, but you don't need to go to Health Canada approval. So we've got all across the spectrum now, and there's many technologies that are on the lower end of that, so that there are some regulatory requirements, but if they're relatively non-invasive and the harm, if you will, is minimized, the amount of regulatory hurdles or clinical trial work you have to do is pretty minimal. So we're starting to find now, where a number of years ago, the health tech or med tech sector was really burdened by a lot of clinical trials, is because we were working either with drugs or with medical devices that needed to be implanted, like an artificial heart and those kinds of things, right? Then those required a lot of big regulatory requirements, as one would expect. You're putting something into someone's body. But now, with all the new technology that's out there, so much of it non-invasive, the regulatory hurdles are not as challenging in many of those areas as they were before, which makes it really good for our investors, Zach, because all of those things is risk, right? And so if you can start de-risking these companies, then they become more palatable to our investors, to your investor group over at TNT, right?
Yeah, and actually, you just hit on something that was going to be my follow-up question, which is, I hear this comment from investors fairly often in the space, which is, I don't think this company has fully thought through or fully understands their regulatory process and the risk associated with it. What do you have? And I completely agree. This is a really important thing to consider as you're building out any type of life sciences company. What's your advice for people at kind of these beginning stages here, where it's I need to build in technology talent at my team, or just for now, just understand the regulatory process or regulatory talent on my team? Where should they go to get that kind of talent?
I would bring in experts. So, just like anything else, Zach, if you're a health tech company, but you have an office set up, you're not setting up your own computer system. You're hiring somebody to come in and just do the network and get your laptop set up, right? By the same token, I would say, go to a regulatory consultant. There's a ton of them out there. You'll have to, be discerning. And in some of those cases, myself and colleagues can help there, but get a regulatory consultant, walk through how your solution is going to be used in a live clinical setting, and they can do an assessment and tell you what the regulatory requirement pathway, which direction you'd have to go. Is it more clinical trials because it's invasive and has a lot of potential for harm, or is it really non-invasive and the impact is minimal? That regulatory consultant will be able to tell you, and I would strongly recommend bringing someone like that on. And you don't have to bring them onto your staff. You just go, hey, I'm going to hire you for a contract. I'm going to walk you through my product and how we think it's going to be used. Please tell us, what is the regulatory pathway we need to take? Once you know that, actually, our regulatory systems in Canada, while they're slow, they're actually relatively straightforward, in the sense, if you can actually go online, or you can even talk to Health Canada and say, hey, I've been told that I've got a med device and it's going to be a class 1. What are the steps that I need to take to get this approved? They will tell you. Here's a document. This is what you need to do. If you're determined that you're a class 1, that's fine. Or a class 2 or class, whatever it is, whatever that pathway is, they can tell you what the steps are that you need to do. It's not, it's not magic. It's all written out in black and white. And so all you need is that regulatory consultant to help you to decide how what Health Canada would, what path that they would want you to take based on the kinds of technology that you have, and then you just follow that path. The challenge we're having though is that some of these folks coming in with a digital health solution, it's data, and maybe it's an app that you're picking up heart rate from something or so forth. Then they don't know if there's any regulatory requirements for that kind of a device or not. But that's an easy thing to solve. Just get one of these consultants and they'll tell you.
Okay. Well, that's good advice. I think that probably for everyone listening, probably people like Reg at Health Cities, Andrew McIsaac at API, and probably our friends at Innovate Calgary all have a wealth of or a large library of consultants that can help solve this particular issue. Reg, we got a couple minutes left here, and I just got a great question from someone who I believe wants to remain anonymous. But let's open it up here. Why are you building health cities here in Edmonton? Is there something particular about Edmonton, Alberta, that makes a good position for health cities? Or you want to speak to that for a minute?
Yeah, no, that's a really good question, Zach. Look, I still hold to the fact that I think we have a really interesting scenario here in Alberta, where at least the acute care system is all under one system. So having 4.5 million people all tied into one system can really be a leveraging platform, right? And so if we can figure out how to turn that into a platform for innovation, we've got something in Alberta that you don't have in any other jurisdiction in Canada. So that's sort of the big hairy goal that's out there, to say, can we convert this huge system that we have here into an innovation platform? Because if we can, then honestly, the world is our oyster, because we've got that perfect environment where we're not too big. A lot of folks say, that 5 million mark is a really good number to have impact in testing and trying out healthcare solutions. But the other advantage we have in Alberta is, with that 4.5 million people, we have a really broad genetic diversity in such a small population, which just makes it the perfect petri dish to do this. So that's why we're still here. We think there's that opportunity, and we want to make that a reality.
That's awesome, Reg. And you gave that mention to the government looking at this, the open data platform. So you're still optimistic that this could happen. We could get all of our ducks in a row and make this happen.
We get all our ducks in a row. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I see a question in the chat
from Javad. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, startups running public awareness campaigns. We typically don't do public awareness campaigns per se. We do highlight though our companies, and then if we see our companies having successes or making impacts somewhere else, or securing funding through a TNT investor forum or whatever, we'll definitely highlight those companies, Javed. But it's going to be tough because I think in our network we have at least 100 companies. And so, how would I pick and choose which company that I would run a public awareness campaign for over another, right? So we just don't have the capacity. We're a tiny, tiny team. So what we've relegated that to is sort of our social media. And like I said, if companies have successes or are making impacts, then we're happy to highlight those.
Yeah, understand, Reg. There's so many great opportunities out there for any organization. You got to focus on the ones that make sense.
Absolutely.
Okay, we're just about out of time here. Look, Simba says, thanks so much for a great session. Thank you for joining us, Simba. People are about to jump off now, Reg. Any parting words for us? How can we help you? What does the future hold for us?
Yeah, Zach, first and foremost, thank you very much for having me on. This was a fun conversation, as I know it always would be when I'm chatting with you. Last words I would say is that, as we're starting to look at the future for Alberta and what are some of those new economies that are going to drive us into the next generation, I would tell you that Healthtech is going to be one of them.
Well, I think we agree with you. One of our winners last summit was with a health tech company. In fact, I wonder if they're from Saskatchewan. We can connect offline. This was our final education sessions, and we'll be back in the fall with another investment summit. So, Reg, thanks for all the support to start TNT.
Thank
Thanks
you.
for joining us today. Thanks, everybody.
Pleasure as always, guys. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Reg.